Donna. There we go. Make sure not to punch myself in the face lifting this back up. Again, it's very important to keep these types of things going. And before we get to this panel, one of the things that I wanted to say is in the Black community, we have this thing called if we knew better, we'd do better. Exactly. That's one of the reasons for such programs like this, is to educate. Hopefully, as a community, we can all do better. So I hope that you guys are very attentive to this. And before I get to this panel, which I'm excited to hear from them, there was an event that took place called the Scatter. Does anybody know what that is? Okay. So as we talk about Juneteenth, you have to keep in mind, there were slaves that were owned, right? And so when they got to Galveston and they were told you were free, the slave owners did not like that. They felt that there was their property. So what they did was they began to shoot and kill the individuals as they left. So these slaves were scattering. That's when you hear that term, the scatter. These slaves were running for their freedom, trying to get free, and they were being killed in the process. So let that marinate. That's another thing that is not talked about when they talk about a lot of these things. They talk about the celebration of getting free, but that came with a big cost. So again, I go back to our community saying, if we knew better, we'd do better. There you go. Okay, so at this time, I want to go to our panel, and I'm going to bring them up one at a time. And shall we start with you, Miss Kimberly? Can we start with, all right. Well, you want to come up or you want to, I can hand you the mic over there. Oh, we got some, we getting fancy. Y'all was holding out on me. There we go. Not yet? Okay, wait a minute. Hold on. He jumping in here. Let's get to this.
Undo the mic for a moment. First, I want to make sure that we thank our starting speakers, Rocky, James, Joanna. Thanks for coming out this afternoon. It's rainy. It's not the greatest day to be out and about, but I appreciate that y'all were still willing to come out and share some words. And I want to make sure that I share these two items with our first speakers. You are adults. You can decide if one should go to the other. You can, you lead your own lives, but they are related items. So if somebody prefers blue and somebody prefers red, you can decide. I am going to be my name is Tori Blackwell. I'm one of the organizers for our Juneteenth event here. I'm going to be facilitating our panel conversation. I want to make sure that folks get a little bit of time to get in because we're a couple minutes early, not super early. And I want to respect that not everybody lives on early time. Some people live on time, and some people live on their time. So I don't want to start us at 2:58 and then 17 people walk in at 3:05 and they're like, wait, what do you mean it's halfway done? I don't want to have us do that. So how are people feeling? Good? Okay. Let's do a little stretch. Little stretch. Because you've been sitting for a little bit. Make sure all those parts moving. We don't want anybody to have some kind of weird compression disorder kick in. You've been sitting on the plane for an hour and now you can't feel your legs. We're not going to do that. And I think that we got speakers out to our panelists. Great. Other thing I'm going to let folks know is that we still have all the things happening outside. So we've got all those panelists or all the vendors. We got all the resources. We've got our music going. All those things are still happening while we are going to run this panel conversation. So if you are a little bit younger and you need something else to do, you can still go out and enjoy the event. If maybe you just need to do a bathroom break, we'll still be here. You can check out a table and come back. But I just want to make sure people recognize There's lots of things that you can be partaking in. So if you get to that point, you need a little break. Bathrooms, everybody know where the bathroom is? Say it louder. Out and around the right. It's not your seat. We ain't as a library or a museum not designed like that. That's a whole future operation. I don't know what that would require. Okay. And now that this is at a spot that I feel kind of comfortable with, and it's about that time, I will go ahead and transition into our panel. Panelists, do you need questions for you? I have those for you if you need them. Yeah. So my big thing with panels is I feel like people do better when they are prepared and know what the assignment is. Like, I'm a teacher. If I really want to make some students annoyed, it would be, hey, it's 2 o'clock. Guess what? This thing I've never shown you before, you're going to do it and get graded on it. Right? That's not really great. So our panelists have access to the questions. We've had some conversation so that we get to have them show up in all of their wonderfulness, all their beauty, and not stare at each other. So just want to let folks know. And I say that more because I know there are other folks out there that also might work with other people. And it's the same strategy that we use when we think about hiring. Like at the place that I work now, we try to give people the questions in advance so that they can show up to those hiring spaces as their full selves, not as their last minute self that maybe is not an extemporaneous speaker. And so they don't get that opportunity to be in that job, even though they were great for that job. They just needed 10 minutes to think about the question instead of asking them randomly what your favorite upside down color fruit is. I don't know what you get out of that. All right, so thank you all for attending our panel. Our panel is titled Writing Our History. I want to start us off by giving a thank you to City of Oregon City, Oregon City Parks and Rec, Oregon City Library, the End of the Oregon Trail Interpretive Center, a number of volunteers, vendors, and resource providers that are out in the hallway, and lastly, the Clackamas County Cultural Coalition that provided us with some grant funds to help offset the cost of this event. I'm going to assume by the prior speakers that we've had, the material that's all out in the hallways, the, week of Juneteenth events that have been going on. I think this is the 5th Juneteenth that I have been able to attend, and I'm hoping to get to at least one more before the end of the weekend. I'm hoping people are starting to kind of understand the significance of the holiday. So I want to, just reaffirm that part of this is a celebratory holiday. Like, Black families were able to reconnect with each other and share joy. The fact that there's still a conversation, though, about what Juneteenth is and what it commemorates is also recognition. Recognition that there is history that has not always been taught and history that has not always ever been written about. So this brings us to kind of a paradox. We all know the importance of history to all communities. It's a source of knowledge, creates a sense of self, a sense of belonging. If the majority community emphasizes written work and other communities have stronger oral traditions for sharing knowledge and history, or they encounter obstacles that limit their capacity to share their written work, how can we create a true written record of our varied experiences and knowledge, and a record that includes all the voices that make up our country? What does it mean to inhabit that space of writing, storytelling, and contributing to the broader historical record while doing it through the lens of a minoritized community, an under-resourced community, a community that doesn't have the same access? Those two questions underlie the conversation that we will be having on stage amongst the panel. Rain. So I'm going to do a brief introduction of our panelists, and then I'm going to give them opportunity to introduce themselves. But our panelists for today are Bruce Poinsette, and Bruce, you want to raise your hand? Kim Moreland. The Kim Moreland, so she gets a round of applause too. Emmett Wheatfall. And David Walker. So we'll do some introductions. We've got some questions that we're going to have some discussions around. Once the formal panel discussion ends, we're going to shift into a Q&A period so that audience members can also ask questions. I ask you to be thoughtful about your questions. We do have cameras. I assume people have seen the cameras back there. So we're recording the event, but we're not going to record the Q&A session. We're going to record the panel just so that we can share that content with other folks, but we're not going to record the Q&A just to create a space so that people feel comfortable asking good questions. So with that, we're going to go into our first question. Please introduce yourselves and share your connection with Oregon City, Clackamas County, and Oregon. And we're going to start with Bruce, and we'll just kind of go in a circle, Emmett, and then back to David.
Are we on? Okay. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Okay.
Good afternoon.
Yeah. So my name is Bruce Poinsette. I grew up in Lake Oswego, Oregon. I'm currently serving as the executive director of Respond to Racism, an anti-racism organization based in Lake Oswego. As a writer, I've built the last, 14 years of my career doing mostly stories on Black life throughout Oregon. So often I'm hired to cover Black life in places where there's not a lot of Black people. So it could be, obviously like where I grew up, but I've worked on projects like the State of Black Oregon for the Urban League. I recently did a project with Oregon Humanities for a series I was doing called The Blacktastic Adventure, which for this project featured, among other things, a road trip to Eastern Oregon to explore Black history, visit the Maxville Heritage Interpretive Center, doing stuff in Southern Oregon, Central Oregon, everywhere basically. But I'm very much influenced by where I grew up, how I grew up. So I think a lot of people, maybe not, but Lake Oswego has a nickname. Does anyone, just by show of hands, does anyone know it? Yeah, so just for those who are not aware, it's nicknamed Lake No Negro. I always love like the audible reactions when we do that. So for me, it's very important to, I think it was talked about earlier, not participate in the erasure. Like there's a reason it's nicknamed that. There's a climate that exists to this day. But through that and throughout all this state, throughout the history of the exclusion laws and afterwards, Black resistance and Black placemaking has also been a constant. And through my work, that's one of the things I hope to highlight, continue to highlight. And I'm inspired by the people I'm sitting on a panel with who also do that work.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. My name is Emmett, and my last name is Wheatfall, like wheat bread fall down. Wheatfall, one word. I do that because I get called Sweetly, Sweetball, all of them. I'm not a native Oregonian. I came here in 1974, my junior year of high school. My father was in the military, so I had no choice. He said, we're going to Oregon. I said, they still have forts up there. I'm not going to Oregon. But I love Oregon. Oregon is my home for my wife and my grown children. A little bit about me. Some of you may know, and I have some colleagues here, and a former county commissioner, Ken, and his wife, Grace, are here. Would you acknowledge them, former commissioner for Clackamas County? Professionally, I served for 12 years as an assistant county administrator for Clackamas County. That was professionally. I guess by vocation, I am a published poet. I've been publishing poetry for about the last 15 or so years. I'm a recording artist, jazz, blues, and gospel. So I'm heavily influenced by literature and art. And I think that's why they asked me to participate on this panel. So I'm looking forward to participating with the other panelists.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kimberly Moreland. I came to Oregon in 1987 when I married my wonderful husband. And we'll be celebrating 38 years in September. and I'm an urban planner by trade, and that what led me to interpreting and documenting Portland's African American history. I was working for the city of Portland in the Bureau of Planning, and I was asked to write a document that highlights significant people, events, and places in Albina. And so work with a citizen advisory group, work with a technical advisory committee of professors and historians, and we produced a document that was called Portland African American History from 1805 to the present. And that eventually led me to the Oregon Black Pioneers when I started working for as an urban planner for the city of Salem, and it was a small nonprofit located in Salem. And I have been working with that board ever since, and that was 2007. And as a part of that work with the Oregon Black Pioneers, I published a document about the history of African Americans in Portland, which is an Arcadia publication that was published in 2013 when we had an exhibit at Oregon Historical Society. It kind of complemented that exhibit content. And I went on to become involved in nominating historic properties significant to Portland African American history. I'm so proud to say that I was involved in writing the narrative for at least 5 historic properties in Northeast Portland, and eventually became a consultant when I left public sector planning. And as a consultant, I worked with the state of Oregon to create an umbrella document that will allow people to will have a foundational document to nominate historic properties outside of Willamette Valley and throughout the state of Oregon. So that's kind of how I got involved in, and then I'll stop there.
Yeah, my name is David Walker, and let's see, I moved to Portland when I was a kid. I was about 10 years old, 1980. No, I was older than that, like 12, I think, because my mom got a job here. We moved from the East Coast. It was like, culture shock completely, and about last week, I finally got used to it here. But I've been here since 1980. Well, there's some breaks. Went away to college, came back. Every time I came back, it was culture shock. So I'm a professional writer by trade, also an educator. Had been working at Portland State University for the last 10 years. But I'm mostly known for my work in, of all things, comic books and graphic novels. I've worked for Marvel Comics, DC Comics. I've got, and I'm like one of, like, I don't want to brag, right? But I'm like the guy when it comes to nonfiction graphic novels. I saw somebody had March. I don't know if they're in the audience or not, which is John Lewis and Andrew Iden and Nate Powell's book. And yeah, they're giving it away.
The library table.
Like, yeah, those guys, they got nothing compared to me. So, but yeah, I've written a biography of Frederick Douglass, the history of the Black Panther Party, and then my new book, which came out last year, which is fiction, is Big Jim and the White Boy, which is a retelling of the adventures of Huckleberry Finn from Jim's perspective, not to be confused with James by Percival Everett, which just won Nobel Prize and isn't as good as our book. It really isn't, and I challenge you all to read both, and you'll come to the same conclusion. And that's me, and I'm here, and I'm happy to be here, so this is going to be fun.
So, I mentioned earlier that some cultures have oral traditions. Other cultures have common storytelling devices, historical figures, or events that serve as touchstones for that culture. DJ Avalanche even mentioned some of that as he kind of warmed us up for this panel. Those touchstones can be ways writers connect readers to a culture they are unfamiliar with, and they can show how different cultures can also share similarities. The one that we were just talking about in our household is, how many people have ever watched the Super Bowl? Okay, how many people have ever watched the Super Bowl halftime show? Okay, how many people know where the Super Bowl halftime show came from? So there was a show called In Living Color that was a black sketch show, and they decided to do a show during the Super Bowl halftime when all the cheerleaders would be out parading. They did a show, and people noticed. It caused such a large drop in viewership for the Super Bowl that the Super Bowl said, we need to have something that keeps people watching our game instead of turning the channel. Right? So it's,
This is like,
no.
yeah, this is,
This is not long ago. So again, like when I said Super Bowl halftime, it was a different cultural touchstone for some folks than it is for other folks. So my question for the panel is, are there aspects of black culture or history that you feel compelled to highlight in your work, and why? And I'm going to start with Kim.
Yes, there is. And I found that out. I think it's kind of like part of my personality too, is that I'm not like a community organizer. I like the nice stuff, like although I respect community organizing and we need them, and I have stepped in that arena sometimes. But I really like to talk about how African Americans have persevered despite all the barriers. I'm not shy about telling the truth about what happened, but I feel more empowered by how African Americans built communities, sent their children to school, were able to become some of the first in their community despite the consistent racism and barriers that we face as African Americans. And so I do see that kind of as a central theme in my work. And also, the Oregon Black Pioneers, I would say, like, prior to, the Black Lives Matter movement, we did really focus on the amazing community work and effort among African Americans that were scattered throughout rural Oregon. We highlighted those who operated ferries, those who were nurses, those who, prior to, the World War II, when they lived in these small rural communities, but yet helped to build communities in these isolated places. And so we actually have a book that that Gwen Carr, our former vice president of the organization, was the lead writer, called Perseverance, that talked about the history of Marion and Polk County. And so we do kind of focus on that and focus on the amazing contributions of African Americans and how they have contributed to our civic life and government. And the development of Oregon. So that's kind of what really inspires me. I hope I've answered the question.
Anybody else want to?
well, for me, it's like nearly every couple days I learn something I didn't know, right? That's about the only good thing that comes out of being on things like Instagram. There's always somebody who's posting something. I didn't know that, right? So, and I call myself an armchair historian. They're sort of like the armchair quarterbacks, who they know everything that the team needs to do to win, but they've never actually played a game. I'm that guy who knows a lot about history, even though I don't have a degree. I feel like every single one of us is actually a historian, and it's just a question of how much do you want to apply yourself to that. So for me, like, I just had a conversation with someone the other day. They had a book proposal. They wanted to know if there was any publishers I could refer them to. And they asked me, well, do you know about, and of course I've forgotten the guy's name, but I was like, no, I never heard of this person. And he was during the War of 1812, was the most wanted man in America. He was a black American soldier who defected, went to the Philippines, and became a freedom fighter in the Philippines, right? And there's someone who's written a graphic novel about him, and I was like, I've gotten to a point where I refuse to feel stupid and shocked by the things that I don't know. And my goal is to never make anyone else feel stupid and shocked by the things they don't know, because we all know far less than we think we do. And history is like so it's a load of crap mostly, you know, so it's a lot of half-truths and a lot of lies. But if you talk about it like that too much, you tend to alienate people. So it's more like, hey, let me tell you about this cool thing I just learned the other day, you know. I mean, show of hands, how many people know about the city of Vanport? That's pretty good, because there was a time less than 5-6 years ago where nobody knew what Vanport was. And for those of you that don't know, Vanport was the second largest city in the state of Oregon, and it was meant to be temporary housing for primarily blacks who came to Oregon to work at the Kaiser shipyards during World War II. At the end of the war, nobody left. They stayed there. And then in 48, was it 1948? There was a huge flood during Memorial Day weekend, and the entire city was wiped out. Portland State University started out as Vanport College. It's such an integral part of history. And I'd lived here, like I said, I moved here in 1980. I didn't know about Vanport until probably 2000. I was here over 20 years before I knew about it. And I was so angry. And that was sort of the beginning of me like, okay, I got to stop being angry about this, because I'm being angry every single day. And rather than telling people about these things in a way that that alienates them, again, it's all about sharing this information. And it's always amazing the stuff that you find. I mean, I just came back from a research trip at UCLA where I actually showed the entire staff of the Special Sections collection that they had stuff that was not in any single history book in the U.S. And it's just like, and I just said, I was like, yeah, you know, I don't think you guys know what you have here. Do you know about this? And they were like, what are you talking about? And it's just like, you got to be really friendly about it, because otherwise everyone hates you. Well, they still hate you, but that's another thing. So
I just want to add too, I think a common theme with my writing is that I really highlight just ordinary people. A lot of times we don't, and I was inspired by my father, who was a World War II veteran, and I really didn't like history growing up, but when I could imagine his life as a World War II veteran, and that really helped me to love local history. And if you ever read the book I wrote using Arcadia publication, you'll realize that it's kind of like a family scrapbook, and because it was ordinary people that made things happen. And so you often, you know, that's why I really encourage people to interview your parents, interview your grandparents, because they were the history makers. You know, sometimes we want to focus on Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, all these big players, but focus on your own family, your mother, your grandmother. I mean, they, and the people who live, Vanport survivors, they are really the true history makers. And so I love when people will read my book and say, oh, that's my grandfather, that's my uncle, oh my goodness, you know, and it was just, that's really what it was all about.
You know, I'd like us to think for a moment. I think one of the greatest stories of enculturation of a people taken from one continent in the 1600s and brought to this continent, and these people are robbed of their name, their history, their heritage, their relationships, and to be able to survive and then enculturate linguistically, relationally, is one of the greatest all-time stories that there is in history, and I don't think we take time to think about that. I don't know. I'm basically 3 generations away from slavery. There's my father who's passed, my father's father, and then my father's father's father, and we're right into slavery. And so we're not that far away from that. I think it's been an amazing story. I'm unabashed in saying, in affirming the black woman, because I don't think if the black woman was not there when we came in from the field or from the house, or the way we were treated when we were in bondage, to pour oil in his or her wounds, to encourage them to get back up and go back out. And then as we look at the different dispensations from slavery to emancipation, to times of great oppression, to civil rights, until where we are today, I think it's a tremendous story. And I don't think we would have survived without that inner commitment to just live. And then it is so amazing to me that even generations down the line, I can stand when our national anthem is played and tears come down my face because I am an American, all the while knowing that there are millions of Negro slaves buried in soils across this country, and we're still here, enculturated. I think it's a great story, and I'm a part of that.
So it's a hard answer to follow. But for me, I like covering, we've kind of talked about placemaking and what people have built, and covering ordinary people, or quote unquote ordinary people, because the reality is, in a state that, again, is literally built on black exclusion, like, you gotta be a little more than ordinary to make it here as a black person. But when I think about covering, again, just like sort of like these stories we don't think about, or these people who are not, again, like the Dr. Kings, the Malcolms, it's also in just talking about everyday life and the things that we don't think about so much, the things that aren't as big of like historical topics, just how we interact with each other. Often I feel like with a lot of my writing, it's really, if nothing else, it's like stories, it's warnings, it's trying to speak to people like in the ways that spoke to me. I was a big fan of the Boondocks growing up, the show. I wasn't as old enough for the comic strip, although I read it later. But just this, so the Boondocks is like a satire about, a black family growing up in the boonies, in the suburbs, Woodcrest. Very much like Lake Oswego, actually. And so a lot of times when I think about just like what I'm speaking to, I can speak to subjects like, use an example like the Highlander syndrome. Does anyone know what that is? So, yeah, exactly. So yeah, the tagline was, there can only be one, basically. And when you're in these spaces where there aren't a lot of black people, often you are the token in the room. But not just are you the token in the room, you're often pitted against each other. Even if it's unspoken, there's like this competition in the room. And so some of the work I do is just like literally just warning people about that. Don't play into that. Don't step on each other's heads for these people who are going, as soon as you're alone in that room, you're food. Don't do that. And just speaking to these things, speaking to, again, just like what spoke to me, when I was growing up, who gave me advice that I needed, who gave me advice that I didn't realize I needed at the time, and trying to tell those stories and speak to those people. There's another question about audience that well, save. I was about to jump into that answer.
That's why I like these conversational kind of panels. And I will be full transparency. I skipped a question, so I'm going to jump us to a question that I skipped. So there's that. Be fully transparent on both sides. So, and it actually, like you kind of brought it up a little bit. How many people like been on vacation, traveled, been around? Anybody? Vacation? Okay, if you don't go on vacation, how many people go on Instagram and look at other people's vacations? And do you look at those and you go, ooh, that's a place I want to try to get to. Ooh, I'm going to like save up some money so I can go to, Bali and sit on that beach and hopefully not take horrible tourist photos and destroy their economy. Anyway, separate whole other separate thing. But you probably get inspiration on things that you could be doing by kind of relying on what other people are also doing, right? And I think a lot of people do that when they think about what they want to be when they grow up, where they're going to go to school, where they want to work, right? We're all kind of drawing inspiration from others to help us determine what we should do to make our path through the world. So I wanted to ask our authors, who are some authors that have inspired them and how did they get that inspiration? And I think Emmett's going to be our starting respondent.
I think that's really an excellent question. Being a writer is not really an issue for those particular folks who like to write. It's getting published. And when you don't own publishing houses, it was like in music, early black artists, they didn't have record companies, but they were making the music and were selling records. And a lot of people don't know the contributions of African Americans to literature in America. How many of you know that there was a young slave girl named Phyllis Wheatley? Phyllis Wheatley. She had an aptitude for education, and her slave masters, especially the wife, Ms. Wheatley, took on the slave master's name. And she was one of the first Africans that was published in the United States. And a lot of people don't even know that. There are some tremendous authors in American history. Just to mention Phyllis Wheatley, I can't name everybody, and if I leave some people out, please forgive me, I'm just pulling them extemporaneously. Stop and think about Toni Morrison, one of the great Black American writers. How about James Baldwin? Of course, I cannot go without mentioning Maya Angelou and Audre Lorde and Lucille Clifton. I could go on and name Langston Hughes, from the Renaissance era. Even from he wasn't in the Beat era, but there was Gil Scott-Heron in the 50s and 60s. I mean, just so many authors who've contributed to the literature world who don't get read. I think of some great treatises of formal writings. How many have ever heard of Caste, the book Caste by Isabel Wilkerson? Phenomenal book. How about you heard The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander? These are people who are writing sophisticated pieces, of literature on sociology, politics, and stuff like that. So I've been inspired by a lot of these writers. Very quickly, I think a lot of times when people look at my work, they see a hint of flavor, a peppering of Langston Hughes in my work. And so if you guys stick around after this panel discussion, I'm going to take those who stick around poetically from 1619 all the way to today, poetically tell a story. I have a philosophy, and I'll stop. I have a philosophy that said, speak in the language of the hearer. And oftentimes in dispensations, when we're no longer reading the works of our religious leaders, the Dalai Lama, Billy Graham, you could go on, or political leaders. If you study history, it's always been the poets that have been speaking during those dispensations. And I think that there's work coming out by me and other folks that are speaking to our current socio-political situation. You get an opportunity to read work, but there are some great writers who have contributed to American literature who are African American.
Yeah, no, I would add to that. For me, it was the two were Langston Hughes and James Baldwin, and the fact that I didn't discover either of them till I was probably about 18 or 19 years old, going to Mount Hood Community College, was like one of those key moments where I was like, there's something wrong with the educational system in this country, because I should have known who both of them were somewhere around my freshman year in high school, right? And to this day, when in doubt, I always go back to James Baldwin. When I doubt my ability to write, like Langston Hughes made me more interested in writing. James Baldwin made me know that this is what you have to do. And so, like, on a regular basis, I'm going back to James Baldwin. He's sort of like Marlon Brando in Superman the movie, when he's like the ghost talking to young Kal-El, and he's like, my son, you must save these people from themselves. And that's James Baldwin to me. So, and there's other writers too, but when I really stop and think about it, it's like, it's those two that, like sometimes you have to see yourself or see someone that looks a little bit like you to let you know that you can do this. And they were the ones that let me know that I could do it.
Well,
You can say it's me. It's all right.
it was going to be a sweet, unprompted moment, but before that, though, I will say they kind of said everything about Baldwin was it for me, too, and Toni Morrison. And just, you know, again, being able to see, like you said, like, see someone be unapologetic like that, see someone be unflinching. But actually, I do want to speak to you, David Walker, as a again, it was going to be unprompted, it was going to be natural, but now it's this. But seriously, as far as like showing writers like myself how you can not just like center Black stories, but do it in a way that isn't, what's the word? Sometimes when we talk about like decentering whiteness, all these things, it becomes this kind of like rigid conversation for the white gaze versus like actually, you know, just natural and just, the thing that's coming to mind is probably one of the more obscure examples, but you have a series Occupy Avengers with Hawkeye and Nighthawk, and in this case, centering like basically like Nighthawk's woman in the chair for the like comic people. There's like the hero, and then there's like the quote unquote the guy in the chair who's like handling like all the computer stuff, giving all the instructions behind the scenes. So in this case, it was Tilda, and I forget what was the actual like comic name? Was it Nightshade?
Oh, Nightshade, yeah. She was the worst Black female character. No, go on. That was the name, Nightshade, though, yeah.
Okay, yeah, so like worst Black female, just like comic character derivative.
Yeah.
And you made her like the centerpiece of the story, the scene stealer of the story, and like basically like just change the whole dynamic of it. But being able to like show the ability to do that, being able to show not just like the creativity, but saying, this is how we do it when we care about our stories, when we care about our people, what do we want people to take away from it? And having writers like yourself who've demonstrated that, genuinely, I do mean that as far as like actually being an inspiration, actually being, I don't want to use the word role model because it's too cliche. But yeah, so.
When we had a panel dinner, I expressed being intimidated by these three, and now you know why. But I actually was inspired by Nikki Giovanni. She was really one of my favorite poets. And but I really didn't really see myself as a writer. I saw myself as a researcher, and that came from my urban planning training and background, and even documenting and interpreting Black history is more of a research. I saw myself as a writer in this last piece that I wrote, where I highlighted the life of a African-American woman who was a suffrage leader. And that's when I really began to kind of channel her life and really record in words how she must have felt as a Black woman suffrage leader, and just her family, and really kind of, it became more than just documenting their lives. It was more like writing about them, really put my feelings in there. And so I think the people who really inspired me was Dr. Durrell Milner, Dr. Carl Abbott, who was a professor at Portland State, because they were more than just researchers. They were historians, they were writers, they were commentators. And so I'm just beginning to flow in that, where I feel confident to suggest that this is how they live, because I'm not I'm not a history major. I'm an urban planner. So I think I'm beginning to flow in that, and I just love these guys and how they have that confidence and boldness to share and express themselves.
How many of you ever watched the movie Waiting to Exhale with Angela Bassett in it? I'm not here to pipe the movie, but that waiting to exhale. And I think one of the misnomers that we have about Black literature is that I think a lot of people think that we as Black writers are wanting to poke our finger in the chest of white people and say white people are bad, and that's not what we're doing. When you are in a society where oftentimes you don't get a chance to really enjoy the richness of free speech, and you can write, then you get an opportunity to give people an opportunity to go home and sit in their dining room or in their bed at night and actually put on the lens of the writer and be able to view that world through that lens. And I think one of the things we've got to get back to is the fact that, I think one of the things that I've enjoyed, and I want to say this wholeheartedly, the reason why I love poetry rather than novels and fiction writing, because in novels, I'll write about Timmy up to chapter 2. But when you get to chapter 10, I forgot about Timmy. It's just too long. So I love although poetry can be long verse, but what I'm trying to say is that writing allows me to go places where in our society and the world I can't go. Some of you are old enough to remember the Hardy Boy mysteries, the Nancy Drew mysteries, and you went with them. And I want to encourage you, if you want to understand our culture, our community, what we know about our history and heritage, it would behoove you to read our work.
This is an easy transition to our next question because it's already showed up a few times, just thinking about who the audience is that is engaging with your work. So how do you navigate writing for both Black audiences and wider, potentially less familiar readers?
Yeah, so I think for me, I write for us by default. I've been a person who hasn't really fit in anywhere, so I don't code switch as much for people. I'm just kind of awkward across the board. But honestly though, white voyeurism is it's just the nature of what we do, especially in a place like Oregon. It's like the population numbers are what they are. So for me, it's a matter of, kind of like I said earlier, I'm writing to people like me. I'm writing to people in similar experiences with the understanding that, yeah, a larger audience is watching that may not understand everything. But the beauty of education, curiosity is when we want to learn these things, we do. So I don't need to sugarcoat it. I don't need to mash it down, chew it up, and spit it down into the mouths of white people to make it understandable when it's not that easy. The same way when we want to learn about other things, we do it. So instead, I also want to reject this idea of, we're a monolith. You can look just on this panel here. So 5 different Black experiences. And I like to highlight the diversity of, again, Black experiences, Black voices. One of the projects I was really proud to do as part of this Oregon Humanities Storytelling Fellowship I mentioned earlier was also a dinner conversation between Black Native Oregonians and transplants. It's a conversation that often comes up in our communities as far as where are you born here? Where did you come from? And all the little tensions and nuances that come out of that. It's not as, necessarily as fascinating or interesting. It's not the thing that draws white people, but again, if I let that dictate how I make my work, it would suck, honestly. So being able to have this conversation with, 6 people around the table from different generations, different experiences, some who, again, Oregon transplants, some born in Oregon, having an almost all Black film crew do it at a Black-owned restaurant so that it's not just to say, oh, it's Black, 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 Black. It's to curate an experience, to make sure that this is a place where people feel comfortable and free to freely express themselves and then have the beauty of the conversation that comes out of it. So it's not just this, there's a lot of jokes in that conversation. There's a lot of stuff that would otherwise be considered, oh, you can't say that for, a broad audience. But again, who cares? There's a reason Baldwin spoke to me. There's a reason so many of these works, I mentioned the Boondocks or, some of these things that led me to do the reading weren't book recommendations. They were, oh, this was referenced in a stand-up comedy special. This was referenced in a show. This was referenced in this creative work. And that's what led me to dig deeper. But for me, it's creating things like that, creating things that are authentic, speak to, again, whether the things that would have spoke to me, spoke to people around me. And you let all the other chips fall where they may. And also, just the last part about this is the thing about, look at the dynamics or, the demographics of this audience here. It's not mostly Black people, but it is, again, just how it is. But from that is also the reality that it's also business. Part of what allows me to write these projects is working with generally, white-owned publications who appeal to a wide audience. And I feel like you can thread the needle and do both, again, without, for lack of better words, pandering or sugarcoating or watering stuff down.
Did you want to go? I don't want to hog the mic. I don't either. I don't want to hog the mic, but something, I have a difficulty in getting people to buy my books. I had books out there on the table. How many people walked by, didn't bother to stop and take a look at the book or the books? That's why, I've started to incorporate now and said, hey, touch the book, pick the book up. There's a treasure there. There's a treasure in that book. Just very quickly, because I'm out of time. I was at Literary Arts in their new bookstore, and I had 2 of my books in there. There are thousands of books in there. What's going to motivate somebody to go pull my book out and take a look at it when there are thousands of titles? I call libraries bookstores graveyards. They're graves with tombstones of all the names of all these books. We want to encourage you to buy our books. Give our books away as gifts. Read what we're thinking, seeing, and feeling, and you will understand a lot more and better about about what we are facing and challenging in this society. Didn't want to hog the time. Okay.
For me, I tend to write everything for myself when I was younger, when I was trying to figure out who I was, when society was trying to tell me I was something else. This comes back to a great Baldwin quote, right, where he talks about that. But everything I write is meant to reassert my humanity. And if I can reassert my own humanity through what I've written, I know it's going to work for other people, right? And so I write for anyone who's willing to open up a book and take a chance and read it. And when we were working on Big Jim and the White Boy, myself and Marcus, the artist, I said, we have two goals. One is to educate or to entertain. The other is I want as many people as humanly possible to cry when they're done reading this book. Because if we can emotionally move them through a series of pictures and words, which comics and graphic novels seldom get people to cry. I was like, if we can get them to cry, we will have touched their humanity in a way that they didn't know was possible. And so every time somebody says to me, I read your book, it made me cry, I look at them and I say, thank you. And that's it. That was the goal. And we did it. We hit it out of the park. So it's like, I want to remind all of you that you're human beings, right? Because most of what society does to us is try to rob us of our humanity and make us think that we're less than. Even if we're in the majority part of the whatever population base that we're in, we're still in some sort of subcategory that tries to make us feel like we're less than. And we're not. It's like it's someone places that less than on us. Time to reassert our humanity.
I cried when I finished it down there.
Yeah, you can put me in the pile, it's fine. Okay, I'm gonna do two more questions before we move into our Q&A session. And we'll throw this one out there, since it's already been kind of mentioned a little bit. Writing, as David shared, like it's sort of a solitary activity. A lot of times the words are written for the writer, but you all are all willing to basically put yourself out on Front Street with all these experiences. So how do you stay grounded while writing about personal or even possibly painful experiences? And I get to lead with David, who was just talking about this.
That's a great question. Didn't I say I was gonna tackle that one?
You did.
Yeah. I've kind of forgotten how I handled it.
Maybe that's your strategy. You just don't think about what you put out there.
No, it's a lot of it is making sure there's at least a handful of people around me that I can turn to and I can talk to, because sometimes you get lost in the work, especially if you're doing historical research related work, and like when I was writing the Black Panther Party, there were moments that like were absolutely soul crushing. And I remember I would talk to Marcus, my artist, about it, and there was like about a 4-month gap between when I would write something and he would get around to drawing it. And so I would call him, I'd be like, man, I'm working on this part right now and I don't know what to do. And he would kind of talk me through and I'd be like, this is really emotional. And he was like, okay. And I was like, when it's your time to draw this, call me, because you're not going to be able to do this without some semblance of emotional support. And then we did the same thing with Big Jim and the White Boy. So we had each other. But I just do things like, I make sure that I get out at least once or twice a week, like literally get out of my office, get out of my home, because I work from home, and socialize with other people. But then I also have the feel-good playlist, which is like a lot of Stevie Wonder, and that I sometimes I'll just listen to the same song for like 2 hours straight, and I've learned to not, like, especially as men of a certain age, we're taught to hold our emotions in and not to give in to the things that we're feeling. And there's times where it's like, yo, if you're writing about slavery, or you're writing about the civil rights era, or you're writing about like some really difficult stuff, like if you don't break down and cry, there's probably something wrong with you. So I just have learned that it's okay to break down and cry. And sometimes, and then you just pick yourself up the next day and you go, okay, I'm doing this. I'm going through this process, learning about these things, feeling these emotions, because there's other people who need to go through this process too. But they're either they don't have the skill set, or they're not in the same sort of fortunate position that I'm in to do it. And then sometimes it's just like, and now I need to take a break and just work on something silly, or just, you know, watch Abbott and Costello movies over and over again.
I know for me, I'm human. I think, I feel, I see, I make value judgments. And I need to express myself. And I think what has drawn me to the literature form of poetry is because it makes me be concise and exact about what I'm trying to say. Every word I use, every punctuation, everything has a meaning to it. And I try not to talk about my personal life, because that can be touchy and stuff like that with family members. So I don't do that, but I write about what I think, feel, and see. And I use an analogy. I said, I'm a safecracker with poetry. I'll write a line, click, another line, click, click. And after I get through writing those lines, when I turn that handle and it opens, if I read that poem a week, a month, a year, I wouldn't change a comma, I wouldn't change a word, because it expresses exactly what I want to say. I think I'm like you, Bruce, and you guys. Baldwin, I was reading an article where James Baldwin said, when you write a sentence, write it as clean as a bone. And that phrase jumped off the page. It was like the movie Aliens. But he was exactly right. We're writing to actually communicate something with a kind of exactitude, preciseness, that when you read it, either you can relate to it or you can understand it from a deeper place.
I'd just like to just share three things. When what keep me grounded is prayer. Because when I was writing the book for the Portland African American History document, the Educator publication, somebody asked me, well, why are you writing it? And so that really kind of took me back, and so at the wee hours in the morning when I'm sitting down writing the book, I had that in the back of my head, like, why am I the one, you know? So I had to really stay focused on what I believe the Lord called me to write this, because nobody else was writing it. And also, I have a sounding board. My husband, you know, when I'm struggling, when I'm like, you know, this person told me this, should I write this? You know, he you know, the one who keeps me on track and keep me focused and remind me of my calling as a writer, as a historian. And I also, what keeps me and what helps me to get through those painful experiences and really talking about those is that it's going to help someone else. And it's going to prevent us from repeating history. I mean, that's really the primary reason for, I think, all of us, you know, is to make sure that our words are seen as growth, that they will be, you know, that we will help to repeat, you know, the past.
So I'll try to keep this one real quick. For me, what keeps me grounded, one, is just trying to be in community, whether it be with other writers, other people in the organizing space who just, you know, understand the things we're going through. Then also, this may sound a little weird, but like writing itself, writing and publishing. For me, it's hard when it's like, I describe it as like I have these ideas, I have, you know, these reflections, these things I want to share, these lessons just like burning on my soul. And if I don't put it out there, that's the only thing that I know doesn't help. You know, things may come of them what they may, but the only thing I know is like if I don't write it, if I don't put it out there, if I don't give it a chance to, you know, maybe touch somebody, maybe change something, then that's the hardest thing for me to deal with.
Like, writing is the hardest thing in the world. It is the most difficult thing I've ever done. It is painful. It is brutal. Most days I think I can't do it anymore. And there's only one thing more difficult than writing, and that's not writing. Okay? And like, that's my creative calling. And we all have a creative calling, even if we don't know what it is. And I've given over to it. I spent a lot of time fighting it. I've been fighting it the last 4 days. I haven't written anything in 4 days, right? I know, it's like, and I got up this morning and I was like, okay, I got to get some writing done. And that's it. Like, there's something inside all of us that we need to get out. Some people can get it out through painting or songwriting. Some people do it in their gardens. Some people do it in their kitchens, right? But there's this creative calling that we all have. And if you don't heed that creative calling, you will always be unfulfilled in who you are as a human being. You got to find that way to let that creativity out and to thrive. It's not meant for anybody else. Sometimes you get lucky and you get a book publishing deal, but that's not why you wrote the book. Sometimes you get a recording deal, but that's not why you recorded the song. Sometimes you get to open a restaurant, but that's not why you started cooking. You did it because there's something you need to express. So that's what it is. It's finding that thing that makes you feel alive and then letting it live. That's how you get through it. That's really it.
All right, I'm going to wrap us with a final question before we transition into our more Q&A period. So I don't want this to get weird, because it feels like something that would be the question for the in memoriam section of one of those like award shows. Like, next we're going to walk through all of the great recordings of Prince in this montage of things. But I do want to ask you all, what legacy do you hope your work leaves for future generations of writers, especially Black writers? And I think Kim was going to be our lead.
Thank you. I thought about this a lot, and, you know, and I think I need to share that, you know, I'm hearing impaired and speech impaired, and I was in speech therapy all of my elementary years. And so I had struggled with writing, you know, because sometimes you don't write what you don't hear. And so when I went to college, I was always going to the college lab, the writing labs, and then I found out later that there's editors. And so sometimes our disabilities can be a barrier. And especially if you don't have people in your life who are telling you that you can do this, you know. But, and I didn't really have a lot of that support. I had a lot of love, but no one saying that you can overcome this. And so for me, being a writer was just pretty amazing. I just was really, because I struggled so much in college, that's what I would leave to young folks and young writers. Don't let any physical disability that you may have prevent you from writing, because there's a lot of help, and especially today you have AI. Yeah. But you know, there's so many tools, and your voice matters. Your voice matters, and that's why we, you know, it's so important that it's so important that young folks know that writing can be a tool for expressing yourself, but also helping the masses, you know, helping solve problems, helping to create new solutions. And if you have any physical disabilities or anything that you struggle with, or things that really come against your confidence that I can't do this, remember, with the right support, you can. And take advantage. Like when I was in college, I didn't take advantage of people who could take notes for me. I mean, take advantage of everything they give you, because you're only hurting yourself. You know, I might have known or gotten into this field earlier had I received the support. And also, when I love poetry, and as I shared before, Nikki Giovanni was my role model, and I submitted a bunch of poems to Essence magazine, you know, and I was just so inspired by Nikki Giovanni, and writing poetry about my experiences, and I got denied. So that was it for me. Don't let denial stop you, you know, because, you know, and so I was devastated, but keep moving, you know, because there's someone else who wants your work, or someone else who values you and what you bring to the table.
So when I think about legacy, at least what I want to pass on is kind of similar in, you know, hopefully playing a little part in letting Black writers, especially young Black writers, storytellers, know that their stories are valid and valuable. And I think one of the things that's been kind of cool about like the RTR, Respond to Racism work, is that, you know, I'm 36, but I've already lived to see projects I've done be kind of like repurposed by students I've worked with. For I'll just name one project. A student I work with, Maya Gordon, made a documentary, Lake No Negro, that's probably, there's not a lot of documentaries, as you can imagine, on Lake Oswego, so I feel like it's probably like the preeminent one on all racism in Lake Oswego for the moment. But, you know, again, just being able to see not just that your work may have had something, but actually like really see if people like find value and use this and create things from it, like that, you know. I got my start working at the Scanner, one of Portland's historically Black newspapers, and so many things you end up covering is like this thing from a family member that never got the coverage it deserved when, you know, their family member was alive. And if nothing else, I really, again, just want to play a small part in making sure that Black writers, Black storytellers, and their works get the respect they deserve, and hopefully people get more of their flowers while they're alive.
For me, I think it's, I hope my legacy will be intellectualism. I would love to be revered as Baldwin, but that's shooting for the stars and still falling back on earth. And just the final piece of it is that I have a little saying, I've had it for years: I cannot speak for my poetry. It must speak for itself. I could say that it's good, I think it's great, but the person who's handling it, if they don't see it that way. So to me, I hope it's one of intellectualism, a legacy of that.
I say this kind of goes back to what I was saying before, but I taught at Portland State University for almost 10 years in the creative writing department. And then I get asked this question a lot, you know, like, how do you write a book? Or how do you write a graphic novel? The simple thing is you just sit down and you start writing it, right? So if there's any legacy I want to leave behind is that what I've discovered is that most people are waiting for someone to give them permission to do that thing they want to do. Now, provided that thing you want to do isn't something terrible like being a mass shooter or something like that, I'd like to be known as the person that gave everyone permission. So if there's any of you here thinking about writing a book or taking up an instrument or doing something that you're afraid to do, I give you permission to do it. And that's the legacy I left behind. So one of you, I don't care who it is, if it's the youngest person here or the oldest person here, figure out what you want to do and just do it. And don't let the rejection stop you know that the rejections and that the failures and all those things, they're all just things you learn from. Look, I just had something rejected last week, and the editor who's working with me it's like a freelance gig, and they were like, I don't understand why these people hired you, because what you gave them is better than what they want. And I was like, yeah, it's fine. I'm just taking their money and running, right? I don't need them to validate my existence as a writer, because I know that I'm good, right? So don't let other people, the dumb things that they say, learn from your lessons, learn from your mistakes, learn from your failures, but just never stop trying. Because then you've just consigned yourself to like a very long, painful existence of watching Netflix all day long, so.
All right, with that, I want to give our panelists a round of applause. We have a few minutes available for audience questions. If there are audience members that would like to ask a question, we can do that. I'm going to swap out mics with you, David, just so I can walk on. So, if anyone has questions, I have some backup questions here too, but